All right, before we put this thing back together, we're gonna change all of the brake pucks. These are Goodyear brakes. So they've got 3 pucks on each side, actually 6, counting the ones on the inside. So what we're gonna do in this video is go through how to get the wheel off and then how to change the brakes. So the first thing that you'll notice here is we've got these brake lines that come off of the strut, but we've got to take these two clamps loose so that this thing will swing free. And the reason is it gives us a little bit more slack, because what's going to happen is, if you look here, there's 2 bolts that go through this bottom pin here, or this bottom plate. We got to take these 2 bolts out. That plate comes off. Then we come around here to this side, and we have the same plate, same 2 bolts over here. This is our jack point. So we'll take those loose. We'll take this bolt out of our nut here, loosen the nut, and then what we do is we jack the airplane up, and this axle will fall out the bottom. Once it falls out the bottom, we're going to use the slack in our line to pull the whole wheel forward. And then once we get the wheel forward, we'll take that nut loose on the other side, slide the axle completely out of the assembly, and then that will expose both sides of our master cylinder so that we can work on it. So we'll pack the bearings in the wheel while we're doing this, and we'll just go through the whole process as we're going. On the Goodyear brakes, I wanted to show how you tell when the brake linings are actually getting close to being worn out. So you see these pins that are sticking out. I'm going to show you the ones on the other side. So when these pins get flush with the housing, that's telling you that you're getting, in fact, I think it's 0.375. This one is probably a better example of where you need to start looking at replacing the pads. These guys are already almost gone. So if we walk over here to the other side of the airplane real quick, you can see here is what it would look like on a better set of pads. You can see how much space you have stuck out here on those pins. So each one of those pins are stuck out more. So that lets you know these pads are good. The pads on the other side are bad. Nuts that are holding that plate on in the bottom, it requires a special tool to get it out. So what I've done is I've just welded 2 nuts together, and I'll show you how this is going to go into the piece to make it work here. So basically, this thing is going to slide up inside of here. And then it locks into place, and then you can unscrew the pin. At least the one on the other side. Looks like this side might be different. So let me get over here. So basically, this is the pin. So if you look right here, that's just going to slide up in there like that, and then I'll use a wrench to get it out. So it's kind of a reverse nut there that you gotta put in. The one over here is actually got a little bend in it, so I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. I'm going to try to get it bent back out, but right now I've at least got a tool to get one of these things out, and then I'll have to figure out how to get the other one. So once you get the 2 pieces out, I just bent that other one back over so that my nut would go up in it. And so this thing, you just tap it, it'll come off. And then once that comes off, the next step is to get this pin out. So we've got to figure out how this pin, I'm assuming it just drops straight out the bottom. So we got to get it broke loose so that we can get it out, and then we should have this side ready to come off the airplane. All right, and I just used a pair of pliers to turn this a little bit, and then this pin just comes out the bottom, so not a big deal to get that thing out. So the two pieces that came off of this side are actually require 11/16 nut or whatever you got to put in there. We just welded the 11/16 bolt nuts together to get those out, and so now there's another pin that is in this side. So we've got to, the next thing we got to do is take these two clamps loose so that the brake lines, we got more play in the brake lines. So we had to take this bolt out of the axle and then unscrew the nut so that the bearing will come out. And then what we're going to do, we've got it loose over here on the other side, and then what we're going to do is we're going to pull the axle through to get it out of the way. So let's get over here to the other side. So we have that pin that's sitting here. We got that broke loose. So well,
sure.
No.
Just
leave it on because I may figure this out. Okay. So if you turn the wheel backwards,
nothing to it.
you can pull it right out. So there you go. So now what we're going to do is we got to pull the ring and the bearing and the axle all the way out, and then we're going to be replacing the discs in here. So this plate comes out and it'll come out of the brake pads. We got to loosen them up a little bit, but they'll come out of the thing. This plate comes out, and then we got to clean this race and get the bearing out and clean all this stuff up and repack the bearings. So it's kind of hard to see down in there. See if I can get a flashlight here. So what you end up having to do is press the pistons. Let's see if I can do this. Press the pistons back up inside of the caliper here so that you can get the brake pads out, and also pull this gear forward so that you can get to all this stuff. So I've already done that. You can see here are the brake pads that came out, and as you can see, it was definitely time to do these brakes. It's very, very thin, and there's no pad left at all, so it was not a minute to spare to get those things replaced. So now what we're going to do, before we put the other brake pads in here, we're going to go ahead over here to the wheel, and we're going to take out the bearings and clean them up and re-grease them. To get these out, there's a pin here that you squeeze together and pull that out, and then that'll let the bearings come out. So we're going to go ahead and take those out and get them just to show what this. So this is a new brake pad. So you can see the little indentation here that actually slides inside the caliper. So there's little indentions on both sides that slides up into, that kind of holds the brake pad in place. And then you can see, so there's your indentation back here on this side, and then you can see the difference in the brake pads thickness. So we definitely were ready for some new brake pads. So this is the bearing after I've gotten it out and cleaned it up. It's still in good shape. And then this is the pin that I was talking about so this is the dust cover that goes over the thing, and then this pin went inside the wheel to hold all that in. So that's everything all nice and clean and ready to go back into the airplane, into the wheel. Here's the race that the bearing sits in, and then we've cleaned all the grease and stuff out of the wheel. Still got to do the bearing over on the other side, but I'm gonna go ahead and get this one in before I go over to the other side. All right, so we got the brakes changed, got the wheel back on. I wanted to mention a couple things. One, and maybe just one thing, but this is the outboard side of the wheel where the caliper sits, and this plate that goes down here on the bottom, you need to remember you're going to have to jack the airplane up to get this off, and you need to put this back on before you start letting the jack down. The problem is that there's not very much room between this back section and the bottom of the plate, and so you can't get it over the studs if you forget to put that on before you set the airplane back down on the axle. So when you're putting this thing back on, it's easier to take all this stuff loose, or when you're taking it off, take everything loose before you jack the airplane up, because that way you just roll the wheel out of the way. You don't have anything to deal with while the thing's up in the air. And then when you're putting it back together, if you put the jack down on the wheel, then you can, just roll the wheel back into place, slide everything back into the wheel, roll it into place, put the jack down on the axle, and then you can put everything together. But as you're putting this wheel or this side down on the axle, you've got to make sure that you remember to put that piece in, otherwise you end up having to jack it back up, which we did because we forgot. So that's why I was mentioning it. Other than that, there really wasn't a whole lot of trouble doing this. You'll notice now that the pins on the brakes are all sticking out like they're supposed to. So that's what a new set of brakes look like. And then as the brakes wear down, these shafts get shorter and shorter and shorter as they go in. And by the time they get flush, which is about the way I bought the airplane, you pretty much don't have any brakes left. So as you can see in the earlier video, there's not a lot there to work with.